Well, I think the early days were that we wanted to bring in world leaders. It transitioned a little bit to major and minor lectures, but in the beginning, we wanted to really make a difference. And so we were thinking of major world leaders. And by the way, they were far less expensive then.
I don't think we realized it would become what it has become. Our first speaker was from the University of Chicago, and I'm not quite sure his name.
Alan Bloom.
Alan
It
Bloom.
was the second speaker, but that's okay.
Okay, the second speaker. And it was in a small room, and few people attended, and we came away and said, not quite what we thought we would have, and then it just blossomed to become better and better, and the speakers were more prominent and better also.
And the one thing that was left impression on me was in the reception afterwards, I was speaking with the interpreter and Gorbachev's daughter, who, by the way, was about 45 years old and wore blue jeans to our event. And I was casually asking both of them, who spoke English, what do you know about the new Prime Minister, Putin? And they said, Yeltsin embarrassed us. Putin scares us. To me, that was something to look forward to, a scary guy in the Kremlin.
He did not speak English. I'm sure he does know some English, so I didn't speak with him directly. I spoke with his daughter. She was drinking vodka, wasn't she, Tim?
Yes, she was.
When I spoke with her, she appeared to be very young, very personable, and quite attractive. And all in all, it was one terrific evening.
Oh yeah, Mike Krzyzewski, a coach of substantial substance. Besides being an excellent basketball coach, he could lead all of us into battle and be terribly successful. He's an unbelievable leader. And that's what he spoke about when he was here. He spoke about the team. And I remember we had him scheduled the next day for 15 or 20 minutes just to speak very briefly to the girls and boys basketball team. He spent an hour and a half, answered every question. He took pictures with all the kids, and he was as gracious as he could be. So even though I'm not a Duke basketball fan, I'm a fan of Mike Krzyzewski. He's a terrific man.
We have a picture in our den at home that says, "You're a good team," from Mike.
That was another scene not unlike Gorbachev. We filled Lily with 3,000 or 4,000 people. She walked into God Save the Queen. It was absolutely spectacular for DePauw. Then we had lunch. And as we're sitting around lunch, Margaret Thatcher is a talker. She's always got her mouth going, and it's usually important stuff. But as she was eating her lunch, a green bean slipped out of the corner of her mouth and stayed there for a few seconds. And I looked around at the 8 students in the circle of the table, and there were 8 of them going like this, trying to help Margaret get the bean back into her mouth. Those are humorous things, and it just proves that even great leaders are very human. And the other thing about Margaret Thatcher that I remember is she does research on almost everybody she meets. So when she met me at the reception, she walked up and said, "Oh, Mr. Ubben, you're from Chicago. Tell me about the Chicago public school system." Well, from then on, I knew that she probably knew a lot more about the Chicago public school system than I did. But it just goes to show you she's prepared, and she's probably just as prepared for a little meeting like that with the trustees of DePauw as she was meeting Ronald Reagan at some stage. She's just a very prepared woman.
The time we spent with her at lunch, she just has so much to say, and she's so enthusiastic that I think that's why the green bean surfaced as it did. But she was very interested in the public schools, interested in the students on campus. She was just a vivacious person and just made an impression on everyone.
She was the only speaker we've had in 20 years who wrote us a note thanking us for the opportunity to speak at DePauw. We were lucky because he was a little too forthcoming. Nobody at that point had commented about the size of the troop level. He essentially said, we didn't have enough, and I think that was one of the first admissions by a person over there in Iraq that the troop levels were insufficient for the job to be done. And that did hit the national news real quickly.
We continue to read about Paul Bremer, so he obviously made an impact on the campus, and everyone else listens to what he says.
It was a big day. We met Colin Powell. Sharon and I met him at the Indianapolis airport and drove to Greencastle with him in the car, and it was elucidating right there because he was just coming off his service as Joint Chiefs of Staff head. Just finished the Iraq War I under President Bush, and he's an impressive person. Gave a great speech. Well, again, we were lucky because the timing was perfect. As I remember, we got Wesley Clark to commit to speak at DePauw, and then I think he declared his candidacy for president. So here we had another candidate for president of the United States coming to DePauw. Again, standing room only speech because of his reputation as a general. And as a general with a different view, by the way, of the Mideast than many generals had, at least admitted to. A very genuinely nice person. He spoke to the football team for about an hour before his speech, and there were nothing but jaw drops as everybody tuned into every single word and breath he took. It was a nice gesture on his part to come and talk to the football team before he spoke, and we had lunch with him and found him to be a lot more engaging than you would have guessed on the casual first handshake. Very nice person. And since we've all seen him in ads, his personality has blossomed, let's face it, since then.
I think the biggest impression I had that Peyton Manning is 6'7", and I'm 5'3", and we had our picture taken, and I look like maybe I'm the little ninja turtle or something. It is one of the funniest pictures we have. But he certainly enjoys talking to the kids. That's where his personality came out.
And you're a Colt fan now, right?
I am a Colt fan. Had to watch him Monday night.
Fred Murad was a friend of all of ours. He graduated in '58, which is our class. We're immensely proud of him. He got Nobel Prize in medicine. As far as I know, he is still the only Nobel laureate from DePauw. But he made the class of '58 immensely proud, and I think we'll again celebrate him in our reunion this year.
Tim keeps saying our timing on getting these people, but Tim spends a lot of time with you in researching these speakers, so we have to give Tim and Ken Owen some credit.
Ken Owen and I collaborate on almost every speaker. It's either Ken coming to me and saying, we can get so-and-so, or I coming to Ken after reading Time magazine or saying, let's go get so-and-so. But together, I think we make a pretty good team. Sometimes I wipe out Ken's liberal leanings But generally speaking, we have had a broad range of people from all kinds of leanings, including Jesse Jackson, for instance, on one side, who gave, by the way, a terrific sermon. It wasn't a speech, it was a sermon. To George Will on the other side, who, by the way, was somewhat of a sourpuss and was looking forward to getting out of DePauw, and I didn't think he was nearly so good.
And for the record, I'm right in the middle politically, but we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Okay.
You better get that on tape, too.
Yeah, I'd like a chance.
Has to be Margaret Thatcher.
And I say now the President of Israel, Shimon Peres. I don't think I took advantage of the speakers that we had at DePauw when I was here, but we're just thrilled that we talk to students who say the lectureships have been very important to them and they have enjoyed them, and we have too.
We are very complimented when we hear students particularly come up to us and say, we know of your name because of the Ubben Lecture Series, and we really enjoyed it. It's a powerful adjunct to the classroom, and even faculty have mentioned that to me, so I know we're making some kind of impact. I think there's even a broader impact, though, that probably stretches across the Midwest. It's a broadening thing for the university, but also for part of the Midwest that we live in.
It certainly has made an impact because we live in Chicago, and I will occasionally go somewhere and say my name is Sharon Ubben, and they said, "Did you go to DePauw in Greencastle?" And I said, "Yes." And parents, mostly parents or cousins, have heard about the series and know our name. It really has exceeded our expectations, I think.
My love for DePauw is I think, obvious. DePauw has been an important part of my life, both as a student, where the best thing that ever happened to me as a student was I got a C- in chemistry and was persuaded against being a chemistry major, was inspired by Dr. Hiram Jomey in economics, and went on to have a pretty successful investment career. Then afterwards, there's always a lull in somebody's connection to the school because you're raising kids and it's a family time. But about 40 or 45 years old, I reconnected and was head of the Alumni Association, went on to be a trustee and then chairman of the Board of Trustees. And that's at least 22 years ago, so I've been actively involved in DePauw for a long time. This is only one way of kind of returning what DePauw has meant to me, and it's been, as we've said, very rewarding, and it's given us a chance to meet some really, really interesting people.
We met here at DePauw and got married a few years later, and we've been extremely lucky in being able to have this lectureship and being able to enjoy DePauw as we do. The people I've met here and my friends are lifelong friends, and I love to get with them and talk about their interests and their families and their trips and the books they've read. They're all still so engaging, all the people and friends that we have met here when I come back to visit, which has been many years.
My job is to work with Tim and Sharon to determine on the front end potential speakers, people who might be out there who we would look at in the future. And then when we decide that this is a person we'd like to go after, to actually make the phone calls and figure out how we go about bringing that person to DePauw. I think they do a number of things. First of all, they engage the campus to find something that people are buzzing about. In the days before Tony Blair, wherever you went, people were saying, "You go, when are you going to get in line? What's a good time to get in line?" So you have that going. It also brings people to DePauw, people who are alumni who live sometimes as far away as St. Louis or Tennessee will come up for a major speaker, and it re-engages them and it gives them a reason to come back to campus. But it also puts DePauw on the radar. When DePauw and the Ubben Lectureship are mentioned on Meet the Press, or when people read about one of our speakers in a Wire Story account, it really underscores the fact that this is a national player on the U.S. education scene, that DePauw University, located in Greencastle, Indiana, is making news. Part of keeping this series vibrant is to bring in different voices and to bring in people who you wouldn't guess would be Ubben lecturers. So I think that's an important thing too, is to really work with Tim and Sharon to say, okay, we've had a lot of these kind of people, or we've had several of these kind of people. Why don't we look over here for a change? And they're always open to those kinds of things because they recognize that having a diversity of thought, opinion, background is very important to our speaker series. When I talk to my colleagues at colleges around the country and the state of Indiana, they will say, how do you get these kind of speakers? And what is DePauw University doing? I think it has become one of the things we're known for. And there are a lot of things that DePauw University is known for, but I'm really thrilled that these 3 or 4 lectures we put on every year are bringing us that kind of prestige. The Wesley Clark event really is the one that sticks out in my mind, only because we had so much national media here. It was days after he'd announced his presidential bid. We'd already booked him before he announced as a presidential candidate. So this amounted to one of the first major public events he staged. In fact, I believe it was at that point the biggest one he'd done in the few days he'd been a presidential candidate. So he had C-SPAN here, New York Times, a bunch of different magazines, and on top of just the demand from the crowd, who wanted to come and see him in Lilly Center, we had all these media folks who were demanding time and wanting a piece of him. It was quite a day. For that moment, that was like the one shining moment you hear about in the NCAA song. That was, Wesley Clark was the deal. National polls had him up by 3 or 4%. It looked like he was going to be a major player in the presidential race, and of course, history suggests that was not to be. Tim has a personality that is larger than life. And Tim also has his opinions from time to time. So we've had some interesting go-rounds, but I will say this, at the end of the day, he's a great partner, as is Sharon. Tim and I talk usually directly first, just because he's the person that says, hey, Ken, Tony Blair's resigning, call him. It's really a joy to kind of see these little seeds that we talk about months and sometimes years before sprout into these elm trees, that draw 3,000 people, 4,000, sometimes more to campus. It's because of our relationship, I think, that we're able to get these things done. I mean, the Tony Blair thing was pie in the sky. I think we all, and in fact, even in December, the month before I signed the contract, I'd been negotiating for 6 months with the Speakers Bureau, and Tim called me and said, well, it's not going to happen, is it? And I said, Tim, I think it is. I have a hunch this is going to happen. And he said, you're kidding. I said, oh, just a hunch, but we've gotten this far, and the things that separate us in terms of the deal are not great, and my hunch is it will happen. But it's really neat to have these kind of conversations that are, what if we tried to get this person? And a lot of them do fall through. But the ones that stick to the wall and become part of the rich history of the Ubben Lecture Series are ones that I'm really thrilled to recall.
Well, I remember very well Tim said he was going to make a significant gift to the university, and it would be something I would not like. And I said, well, I like gifts to the university. And he said, well, you may not like this one because I want to start a speaker series, and we've never talked about it. We had before talked about scholarships and professorships and so on. And Tim's idea, as I understood it at the time, was to provide enough money to DePauw to bring internationally known speakers to the campus and have the administration avoid being criticized for spending money for large speakers' fees. And the other, perhaps more noble reason Tim gave for starting the series was to be able to demonstrate to prospective students and their parents that important conversations go on in Greencastle, Indiana. This was Tim's idea, and I think that's why he phrased things the way he did. It was his idea. It was a creative idea. It served us well, and he and Sharon deserve all the credit. Oh, I don't know. Colin Powell was a wonderful man, very gracious at our house. When Shimon Perez was here, that was the first experience we had had, I think, with an internationally known person and the kind of security that you have to have. That was a learning experience for all of us. Well, I think if you look at the whole array of speakers that Tim and Sharon have brought to campus, we've done a very good balancing job. Every time we have a speaker, if he or she is to the right or left, we get letters or comments from the other side. But I think if you look at the lectureship as a whole, we've done a very good job of balancing the political spectrum.